There may be no one better suited to speak on the Think 2030 stage than our next speaker. As a world-renowned futurist, he has built a career on helping the business world and society at large to prepare for the future, both in what to look forward to and what to be weary of. Here to share some of that wisdom with Elevate Festival, this is Nikolas Badminton.
Just because we can get around.
Okay, it's really fantastic to be here. I live in Toronto now. I'm a Brit. I moved to Canada in 2008, so I'm actually Canadian. I've opted out of being British at this point in time. I'm a futurist. I work with the Futurist Think Tank of futurist.com, and we try and work out what's happening in the world. You know, I work with everyone from like trillion-dollar clients down to startups, and it's so fascinating to hear such a lot of the different stories that are being shared on the stage. We talk about the future. And I've been looking at this for a very long period of time. I was 8 years old when my father gave me a book called The Usborne Book of the Future. And it basically imagined what the world would be like in the year 2000. We'd be living under the sea in cities. We'd be living on the moon. We'd have wearable computing on our wrists. We kind of have that today. Some of you might have that yourselves. But it's incredible when we start to think about what those futures could be. I went to university. I did applied psychology, computing, artificial intelligence in the 90s. It was very exciting. I speak about a lot of different technological subjects. I talk a lot about humanity and society and how we're likely to change as well. But really, there's a fuel for the futures that we imagine. And the fuel is all about thinking what might happen and what might come next. Now, I want to ask a bit of a poll in the room. How many times have you sort of woken up in the morning and you've sort of been dreaming, or you've been daydreaming on the way to work, and you've come up with a really good idea, your imagination's been firing, I'm going to come in, I'm going to write an email, send it to my boss, or I'm going to take them for a coffee, and we're going to have a chat. How many times and how many people, I want to see a show of hands, have done that and been ignored? There's a whole bunch of people sat next to their bosses right now. But, you know, imagination is the fuel for hope and for our futures. But there's a poverty of imagination. We just don't really graduate from childhood really embracing what play and imagination and exploration could be. And that's what we do as futurists and foresight practitioners, is we inject that back into organizations. And we like to help people shift their mindsets. And the shift in mindset from what is, what's happening every single day operationally, the things that give us headaches, the things that your boss needs to talk to you about, the things that you drive in your startup or your large company, you know, keep us busy. And we've forgotten to be curious. So I talk about shifting our mindsets from what is to what if. And what if is a really interesting phrase. You know, the world works this way. What if it worked differently? It's always been this way. Yeah, but what if we challenge that, and what if we come back with a narrative that's slightly different? What if we explore futures that are ahead of us? And you notice in this talk that I'm going to talk about futures, plural. We've heard a ton of people say the future. But everyone in this room has got a different future. They've got different paths ahead of us. You know, the billions of people in the world have all got different destinies. So we have to talk about the plurality of our futures, the possibilities and the plausible futures ahead of us, even the preposterous futures of what might come next. And what we do as futurists, and you're going to probably start doing this after this talk, is going out there and finding academic papers and looking for articles that describe all sorts of different technologies and ways of working, and we call them signals of change, the little things that indicate that the world might be different in the next 5, 10, 20, 30, even 100 plus years. And we're kind of at a cusp of a point of time right now where we have to do that more than ever. We have to find the signals. We need to inject them back into our thinking. We need to think differently, because the world is kind of at a precipice. You know, we're kind of at a calamitous point in time where we can either thrive, come out of this together, or we can let people in boardrooms make trillions of dollars and just keep going on with the industrial complex that's kind of failing right now. So to do that in futures, you know, we identify trends. What's the trajectory of where we're going? And then we write scenarios. So very short stories about, you know, in the year 2045, these people might do this particular thing with this kind of technology. It's got these effects. And once you start to do that, you start to build out narratives of how the world might change. And just to add on top of those signals, we need to root ourselves in some of the biggest challenges that we have ahead of us. And these are mega trends. So there are some things that I talk about. I talk about the shifting economic power in the world. So by 2030, it's going to be China number 1, India number 2, US number 3. So what are the geopolitics and the dynamics behind that? I talk about the water, energy, food nexus. All these 3 things are interlinked. We're seeing that in 2022, and we'll see it beyond this year. We're seeing the rivers drying up in Europe. We're seeing it being hotter than ever across the world. I mean, we're up here in Canada. We had a super hot summer. It's only going to get hotter. I like to say this is the coolest summer we're going to have for the next 100 years. We also need to start thinking about the growth in the world. If you look to places like Africa, and the median age in Africa is 18 years old, and the mega cities that are going to flourish there, like Lagos, Nigeria, that could be 88 million people by the year 2100, we're going to see a huge dynamic change of what's going to happen. The West is going to kind of be less powerful than it's been. And that's a good thing. Colonialization has been a terrible thing for the world. We have to challenge that. We have to challenge that thing. We need to think about how we work together in the world, all countries and all people. And it's not quite working right now. So all of that is sort of a precursor to something that's fun that I like to think about, which is dystopia. Have you seen Black Mirror? Who's seen Black Mirror? Right? We kind of like to explore how bad things can be. But when we work in politics or we work in business or we're trying to sell something, we don't like to talk about how bad it can be. I've just written a book called Facing Our Futures that looks at the positive futures and the hope and the imagination we can use to really work out what's going to happen. But also that imagination can take us into darker territories and challenge our biases and push us into areas of difficult thinking around how bad it could be. Imagine if 300 years ago, at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, they would have realized that the amount of emissions into the atmosphere would have caused kind of the calamitous time that we're in today. No, I mean, that's inconvenient. One of the progenitors of the whole discipline of foresight and futurism is Shell in the industry, Royal Dutch Shell. And they kind of hid what they found when they were doing future scenarios with CO2 warming the environment. This was found by someone called Eunice Foote in the late 1800s as being something that could happen. Greenhouse effect was termed in the early 1920s. So we've kind of ignored a lot of things. So what we do in the work that we do with the Futurist Think Tank is really open the minds of the people that we work with and open the eyes of the world to really think about the badness and the goodness. And together that's holistic, and that's good planning. We know that. It strengthens strategic planning. It creates anticipation in organizations. And it's been proven that that means more revenues and a higher market capitalization. Studies have shown that. But what we do is we use stories. Now, I write science fiction, and I've worked with clients to write science fiction. So I worked with YVR Airport in Vancouver, and we wrote 5 science fiction stories about people traveling in and out, people working in the business centers, having all of these amazing experiences. And one of the things that I wrote about was a family going there. They arrive in an automated vehicle. They go through biometric security. There's lots of darkness here as well as goodness, right? But then they end up there, and there's robots bringing them food, and there's a big vertical farm in the middle of the atrium of the terminal. And this year, they just launched Pier 9, which kind of looks exactly the same as what we had imagined. There's a video online, you can find that. And go and Google YVR 2037. And there's this amazing atrium that they've created with augmented reality and all sorts of automation. And it's kind of based on some futures work we did. We were supposed to do 5 public consultations. The stories that we wrote brought in 18 million impressions online. We had to change it from 5 sessions to 14 sessions, from one destination at the airport to host the sessions to 3 cities. People were so excited about the futures. And why? Because we all think about the futures that lay ahead of us. Some people might only think 3 to 5 years. I like to call that strategy. Anything less than 10 years is kind of strategy anyway. But 10, 20, 30, 100 plus years. I've got studies that I show clients that are 500-year speculations of what might come next. And it is about speculation. It's not about prediction. I'm not in the business of prediction. But once we put ourselves in these stories, and this is the important part to realize, is that we're participants in the narrative. And once we're participants in the narrative, we can start to understand our empathetic relationship with this new world. And once we can understand that, we can start working out, some of those futures artifacts that we can take back from our futures back to today. And we can reflect them off of the strategies, the policies, the regulations, the systems, the structures that we have inside of organizations and the societal structures that we need to work with as well. And we can challenge all of them. But we're not very good at seeing the big problems that are in front of us. We're sort of blindsided. Now, the pandemic came, and everyone was like, why didn't you predict the pandemic? It's like, I had a hard enough time persuading people that the climate crisis was real. Can you imagine if I did a keynote, climate crisis is real, 800 farmers in Alberta? It's like, bullshit. I've had people say that to me on stage, in front of 800 people. And then you say, by the way, a pandemic is going to completely upturn the world. We're all going to be working from home. Your entire supply chain is going to collapse. What do you think of that? What do you think they'd say to that? I think it'd be a little bit stronger than saying BS, right? But these are black elephants. Some people said black swans. A black swan to me is like a meteorite or aliens landing or things that we just can't see. Black elephants are those big things that are in the room that are just staring at you being like, well, we've had a whole bunch of pandemics before. There's 7 million coronaviruses in nature. There's going to be a whole bunch more. I'm just going to be over here, and you're going to ignore me, and then I'm going to come careering through your China shop and ruin everything. This is not the last pandemic we'll ever deal with. But we might deal with it slightly differently next time. There's been a lot of futures work around that, and I worked with a lot of companies to work out what comes next. And it's not that convenient. But we have to look for unknowns. And what we do in futures work is look for the known unknowns, which is like black elephants, and the unknown unknowns, like black swans, and a whole number of different things. Once we can actually build these stories and start to wonder what might come next, the anticipatory capabilities really strengthen our organizations. I've already said it makes you more profitable. I've already said it makes you more resilient. I've already said that ultimately this can lead to be a higher market capitalization. If you look at the top 5 companies in the world in terms of market cap, you've got people like Amazon and Microsoft, Tesla. You've got the bad guys like Saudi Aramco. And it's not Saudi Arabia that's the bad guys, but they're still pumping oil. But now they're basically buying all the stock in all the other top 5 so that they can diversify and become tech leaders in the world as well. And it's interesting to think about that as a dynamic. There are people hedging their bets on the futures being different from what they are today. Saudi Arabia will be an incredible country in terms of tech. I hope their human rights come along with that incredible progress, right? But we need to wake up every single day, and we need to ask, what if the world was different? And we need to go out there, and we need to challenge everyone that we chat to in business, in politics, in what we do, and say, yeah, but, these are short-term promises. These are short-term ideas. I get that we have to do sales this quarter and we need to do annual reporting, but what's our vision for the next 20, 30, 50 years? The best companies in the world have those visions. The companies I work with are starting to build those visions, and they're starting to invest in the places in the world that are going to be changing the world in terms of dynamics as well. So when we think out about our world, think out 10, 20, 30, 50 plus years. I've got a 2-year-old son. I like to think about him being the age of 50 years old. I'm turning 50 this year. And I'm wondering what world he's going to live in. And I start to write stories about that world. And I'm hopeful, but I'm not afraid to look at how bad it could be. Because that primes the conversations when I go into government, I go into these large companies, I go into startups, and I say, hey, there's a balance. Good things can happen, bad things can happen. Let's get a full picture. Because if we can get that full picture, that holistic nature of how we're going to be working, we can really create a world that's going to be great for everyone. And that's why I talk about a plurality in our futures. So people are going to try and sell you like blue jeans or applications or the future of food is this or the future of tech is that or whatever. That's just a precursor to the real work that we have to do as futurists and in futures design. And the real work is signals and trends, scenarios, telling stories, looking at the good, looking at the bad, being ultimately optimistic and hopeful. Futurists are hope engineers. and we can engineer a new world, and we can do that all together. Thank you very much. Thank you.